So let's start with a video segment from Thomas Frank, where he's going to talk about the state of the economy, how it's affected the middle and working class, and how that's affected electoral politics in the modern era.
Now let's talk about the country that elected Donald Trump president in 2016. Okay? Let's talk about what this country looked like last year. It was a time of brisk prosperity, according to official measurements, with unemployment down and the stock market up. For Americans who worked for a living, however, nothing ever seemed to improve. Wages didn't grow. Median income was still well below where it had been in 2007. The labor share, economists have a way of measuring these things, of course. They call it the labor share of the gross national product as opposed to the share taken by stockholders. The share taken by workers hit its all-time low, folks, in the year 2011, and then it just stayed there right through the next couple of years. In the fall of 2014, with the stock markets hitting all-time highs, a poll showed that nearly 3/4 of the American public believed that the economy was still in a recession, because for them it was. Now look, there was a time in this country when average Americans knew whether things were going up or things were going down, because when America prospered, the American people prospered as well. But these days, things are different. Let's talk about some numbers here. If you go from the middle of the 1930s up to 1980, okay, the Great Depression up to the dawn of Reaganism, the lower 90% of the population of this country, a group that we might refer to as the American people, that group took home 70% of the growth in this country's income. That's the way it was supposed to work, and that's the way it did work. If you look at the same numbers from 1997 up till now, from the height of the dot-com bubble up until today, you'll find that this same group, the American people, pocketed none of this country's income growth at all. Their share of these amazing good times that we've been living through was zero, folks. The upper 10% of the population, by which I mean the country's financiers and managers and professionals, they ate the whole thing.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point made by Frank there. The economy's staggering. People try to make the point that, I want to hear what you guys think about this. People make the point that, the Trump's rise was all attributable to one factor. For example, racism or sexism or something like that. And I think, again, that's such a blanket statement, because I'm sure racism played a very huge part of, Trump's rise, but that completely ignores the economic factors. I mean, when you have people that have been economically struggling in a country that's been economically stagnant, and then you have a candidate like Hillary Clinton who comes up and says America's already great, in contrast to Trump, who's saying make America great again. A candidate who supports trade deals and things like that. That is sending a message to the American people and to struggling people who have economic anxiety. Like, that's sending a tough message to them. And let's get to my essential point, which is that it wasn't that Trump necessarily won, it was also that Clinton lost the election. In Wisconsin, right, Trump actually got less votes than Mitt Romney did in 2012. The thing was, Clinton just got way less votes than Obama in these Rust Belt middle-class states. And a large part of that is stagnant economy and the Democratic candidate, in this case Clinton, being affiliated with not doing anything to solve it. What do you guys think about that?
I thought you brought up a good point about the economic anxiety thing. I actually looked into it, and it said that Trump actually won where there was greater possibility for outsourcing of jobs and for automation of jobs. So I think that's very interesting, where there's places where there's a lot of, stress on, their jobs and their lifestyles, that he actually got involved in those areas and won in those areas, and Clinton failed to do so.
Yeah, how the video talked about inequality a lot. I think that does kind of invariably lead to populism. obviously on both sides, because you had Bernie being a very populist candidate and Trump also kind of taking that populist mantle. And I think that's because the people kind of set themselves in a, the people versus everybody at the top, and that really associates itself well with populist candidates. I agree with you that income inequality was probably a huge factor in kind of the angst that led to the Trump win. Yeah.
Exactly right. And there was an exit poll that showed that I think somewhere around 60 or 70% of Trump voters in the exit poll said that trade was a major factor in their decision. Yeah, so you look at it, I mean, like, probably one of the biggest disparities between 2012 and 2016 was Ohio. I mean, like, and that's a Rust Belt state. It went, like, I think 10 points plus to Trump, which is a huge difference from 2012. And you look at the biggest differences, and they are in Rust Belt states that, as you mentioned, were most heavily impacted by outsourcing and free trade. And if you even look at Trump's speeches, what he hammered the most was NAFTA, which was signed by Hillary Clinton's husband, of course, right, and the TPP, which Hillary Clinton advocated for 45 times. It would be rare to find a speech from Trump that didn't address trade.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that frustrates me a lot when people talk about, oh, how could we let this happen? How could we let Donald Trump be elected? It's like, you can see a lot of it is very economically, backed. A lot of people voted for Trump because of economics. It's not because they're racist. It's not because they're bigots. It's because they want someone to come in and change all these different economic issues that have been going on within our country for the past 10 years.
Right, it's a change election, it's a change time. And another point that was brought up is that the stock market is not even a good indication, or GDP for that matter, is not even that great of an indication of the standard of living of the average people. So, pundits may look at how the stock market is rising and GDP is rising. That doesn't really mean anything in terms of the working people. It's a better indication of how CEOs are faring.
Yeah, I think that kind of problem of how the success of America as a country has become uncoupled from the success of the American people, I think is a big part of it, because, people talk about, stock market's up, unemployment's down, but that didn't translate into a better, lifestyle for the vast majority of the American people because their wages didn't go up. That stat that Frank brought up that said, the bottom 90% saw 0% of the growth. I can't remember the exact stat, but that was, it makes a big splash just because you're like, wow, that's
right, and that leads
complete,
to and that leads to a growth in all this populist statements and all this populist rhetoric that we see today.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's very typical for establishment parties in the U.S. and also in Europe to attribute populism to, it's the people's fault. It's the people's fault that 10% of Bernie voters voted for Trump, yada, yada. They may be right to some extent, right? But you have to look at a deeper systems analysis to find out that, why are they having these feelings in the first place? And what you find is this we've been discussing, wealth inequality breeding populism.